The bus rumbled forward, a metal beast swallowed whole by the suffocating night. The interior lights flickered in a sickly yellow hue, casting long shadows that twisted and writhed across the floor, as if reaching for something in the dark corners of the bus. The world outside had long disappeared, the city of fading memory consumed by the oppressive void. The only thing that remained was an endless stretch of road, unspooling into the blackness like a ribbon of despair. I was the only passenger, a solitary figure in a metal coffin. The driver sat silently at the wheel, his silhouette barely visible against the dim glow of the dashboard. He hadn't spoken a single word since I boarded. The only time he acknowledged my presence was a brief glance through the rearview mirror, his face unreadable, his shoulders twitching rhythmically like a puppet controlled by some invisible hand. A chill crept up my spine, the hairs on the back of my neck rising in uneasy recognition. I checked my phone. Nothing. The screen was empty, devoid of signal. A creeping sense of unease began to settle in my bones, as though I were being pulled into a world that wasn't quite real. The air inside the bus was thick, saturated with the sharp scent of stale diesel and something else, something metallic, faintly sweet, like the taste of rusted blood. It clung to my throat, making it difficult to breathe. I hugged my coat tighter, trying to ward off the unnatural cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. The road ahead was a blur, the route unfamiliar, the darkness swallowing every trace of direction. I couldn't remember the last stop we passed, only the unbroken road that stretched into infinity. The vinyl seats beneath me were cold and clammy, sticky with something that made my skin crawl. Then I saw him. A figure sitting at the very back of the bus, half hidden in the periphery of my vision. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The seat had been empty just moments before, but now, there he was, a dark shape hunched in the farthest corner. His head was lowered, his face obscured beneath the brim of a tattered, wide-brimmed hat. His stillness was unnerving, too still. It was as if he wasn't sitting, but rather suspended in time itself. The space around him seemed to warp, the shadows clinging to him like moths to a dying flame. I tried to look away, but the feeling of his gaze, heavy and predatory, pressed against my skin like a suffocating weight. A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. My heart pounded harder, a frantic rhythm drumming in my chest. Yet the silence was deafening. I forced myself to turn toward the front of the bus, away from the man in the back. But then, a dry, rattling breath, like the sound of withered leaves scraping against each other, whispered from behind me. It brushed against my ear, cold and unnatural. My heart froze. Slowly, painfully slowly, I shifted in my seat, the blood in my veins turning to ice. The man hadn't moved, but I could feel him now. His presence was palpable, his gaze pressing into me like a weight I couldn't escape. The air seemed to grow heavier with every breath I took. I needed to get off this bus. I pressed the stop request button, my fingers trembling as I fumbled for it. The plastic was slick beneath my touch, but the driver didn't respond. His hands, pale and skeletal, gripped the wheel, knuckles white and rigid. His shoulders continued their subtle, rhythmic twitch, as if they were being manipulated by something I couldn't see. I swallowed hard, my throat dry and tight with panic. "Excuse me?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Where's the next stop?" The driver didn't answer. His eyes, obscured by the rearview mirror, remained fixed on the road ahead. A faint reflection glimmered in the glass. a flash of something not quite human. His eyes were wide, too wide, black, hollow voids, with a faint, predatory gleam. For a moment, they widened further, revealing a depth of malice that made my blood run cold. Then, just as quickly, they returned to their unblinking stare. No, I couldn't breathe. A low chuckle, dry and rasping, like the sound of old bones grinding together, rumbled from the back of the bus. It was a sound that made my skin crawl and my teeth clench. Ice spread through my veins. I turned to look at the man, my limbs trembling. He was rising from his seat. His movements were slow, unnatural, like a puppet whose strings had been cut and then twisted back together. His limbs uncoiled with a sickening slowness, jerking and twitching at odd angles, as though they didn't quite belong to him. His head tilted at an impossible angle, exposing the pale, mottled skin beneath the brim of his hat. A sliver of his face was visible now, a face that looked like it had been forgotten by time. And then, the lights flickered off, plunging the bus into total darkness. The sudden stop jerked me forward, sending me sprawling across the cold metal floor. My heart raced in panic as I scrambled to my feet, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. I had to get out. I had to get out now. The doors hissed open. I didn't think. I ran. My feet hit the cracked pavement, the air burning in my lungs as I fled, my body moving on pure instinct. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Not until I heard the bus roar to life behind me, its engine growling like some ancient creature, disappearing into the blackened night. I collapsed on the sidewalk, gasping for breath, my heart still hammering in my chest. The world around me felt wrong, too quiet, too still. My phone buzzed, a faint vibration against my palm. A signal. Finally. I looked around, expecting to see something familiar. A street sign. A landmark. Anything. But when I looked up, the bus stop loomed before me. The same cracked pavement. The same faded sign. I blinked, disoriented. The schedule posted on the sign was barely legible. The ink faded and curling at the edges, but the words were clear enough. No buses have run this route in over 30 years. Beneath the schedule, in crude handwritten letters, a note scrawled in faded ink read, "They always come back." And as the wind whispered in my ears, I could swear I heard the distant rumble of a bus approaching.